Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever the case may be, for all of you listening out there across the crazy planet Earth. Welcome to a brand new Vestiges After Dark. And I am your host, Bishop Bryan Willett, coming to you live from the deep woods of western Georgia on this April 25th, 2023. Tonight, it is your favorite type of episode. Open lines, open topics. This is your show, and we are just here to entertain you, answer your questions, and engage you in whatever conversation you want us to have. These are never boring shows. They're always very interesting, despite the fact that they tend to be a bit, tangential, but it's going to be really fun. I can guarantee you that. Don't go away. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Vestiges After Dark. I hope you are all having a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, whatever it is for you. And I hope that you are sitting back and relaxing for the next 3 hours and spending it with us, because it's always such a pleasure to be able to engage you in this way and to be able to have, just some interesting conversation. That's what this show's all about, interesting conversation. And tonight, you are the guest, honestly. So we'd love it if you'd call into the show. We'll give you that number in a bit. First hour, we're going to handle questions from the ether. But for the next, 2 segments, you'll be able to call in and also ask your questions live in the YouTube chat room. That's also a way that you can do it. And honestly, it tends to be the way that most of you seem to prefer. Well, it's much more fun to talk to you on the phone. So give us a call when we start taking calls. It'd be really great if you did. But we're prepared for everything on this show. Joining me this evening is Jamie Wolfe with our libation. It's one we've had before.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, we are finally going to, I think, finish off a gift from Father Chris, the Star Wars Fortis. I believe it's a 100 APV. Yeah, 50% alcohol.
Yeah, it's up there.
Single malt Australian whiskey, matured in oak barrels, and American oak barrels, and it is a very, very nice.
And this particular edition is actually kind of hard to get here too. It's very nice. I
haven't seen the Fortis.
I've
not seen others.
It is very much like bourbon. It has a lot of bourbon qualities to it.
It reminds me a lot of good bourbon.
Yeah,
stronger bourbon.
It is very nice, and
I'm
good right now, but maybe in the second.
You don't want a Jamie pour?
Not at the moment. I had a lot of wine, so.
How about a clerical splash?
You mean throw it at me? Well, I don't want to waste it.
Just a splash.
No, I'm good right now. Thank you.
All right.
But I have enough to cheers.
We may not kill it tonight.
We might not.
I do need help.
Well, you never know.
But yes, a very welcome gift from Father Chris, and I can't believe we still have probably about 2.5 grams left in it, so we may not kill it tonight if I don't get any help from the bishop.
Well,
no pressure.
If we can't,
no pressure. I do have to drive though.
If we can't kill it tonight, don't worry about it. We'll definitely
We'll get her done.
Well, we'll get it done eventually.
We'll get her done.
There's a lot of whiskey in this house, so it's
Yes,
kind of hard to finish off bottles when there's just so many new selections coming
I'm
in.
amassing quite the collection myself.
I'm telling you, you're getting like me. I'm a bad influence.
Probably. It used to be.
I'm a good
It
influence.
used to be guns and ammo, and now I've decided that whiskey's cheaper.
Well, it kind of is, and it's actually a little bit more enjoyable, honestly. Shooting guns is fun, but I'd rather have a dram. I really would. But joining us also, and the I guess you could say the benefactor of this wonderful whiskey we're drinking is Father Chris. How you doing tonight, Father?
Yeah, I'm good. You can see I'm in rather salubrious surroundings tonight.
Yeah, where are you tonight? Where are you joining us from tonight?
So I am in the Western Club in Glasgow.
Oh,
in the
great.
House of Glasgow.
Well,
Okay.
let them all know out there to watch us tonight.
Yeah, so
on my
this
bucket
club was
list.
built in 1825, so it's quite a cool place.
You actually look like you're sitting in front of Ebenezer Scrooge's like fireplace. I love it.
I know. Well, it's a beautiful fireplace.
It is.
They've got these oil paintings everywhere.
Yeah, I mean,
The bars to my right. This is a reciprocal members club with my club, so I'm trusted to be alone in the bar, and it's full of booze, and they know that I.
They know you're not going to drink it all. Well, that's kind of I don't
Very
know. I mean,
nice.
that's daring though. I mean, I don't know if I I don't know if I could trust you with it. Because we know your good taste and fine spirit. So
That is true. Although I'm on water tonight because I've got to drive at 6 a.m. and it's 1 a.m.
yes.
now, and so I'm as you know, an ex-policeman, and I don't take risks on things like that. But earlier on, I was drinking that rather nice single malt that I got
from Campbellton.
Yeah, that's right. And made especially for Loch Fyne as well. So I will send you the contact details because they're good guys, and I think you'll enjoy.
Very nice.
I do like Campbellton.
A relationship with them.
I think Campbellton's got it's an underrated Scotch in this country. People are just like,
One day we're going to do a UK tour.
we will. In fact, we're talking about
Tour meeting going pub hopping.
Tracy and I have been talking, and we decided that with the Olympics coming to Paris, France is probably not the best trip to take, next year. So
They've got a lot of things going on.
well, I'm not. I mean, they're always protesting about something. I'm not going to worry about that. Burgundy and Bordeaux are fine. It's
True.
but I just don't want to deal with all the traffic. Protesting, I can deal with traffic, and congestion, not so much. But so maybe we might end up doing the Scottish tour first. So it's possible, and we're going to just plant ourselves in Islay for a while, and maybe take a week in the Highlands to just do nothing. I mean, I think it needs to be a 2-week trip. I think the first week needs to be seeing the sights, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Islay, all that stuff. And then, buying some good Scotch and then going up to the Highlands, somewhere even north of like Inverness or something like that. And just getting a nice house out there and just chilling for a week, doing nothing. But
that
just
sounds
drinking
lovely.
and eating.
Chill. It's very cold up there.
Well,
Sounds
I can deal with
lovely.
that though. I can. I love the cold. I actually love the cold.
That's why
I
you
grew
have
up
the
in
Scotch.
It is. That's what the Scotch is for. I grew up in New England, so I'm used to the bitter cold, and I spent quite a bit of time in Chicago, and I don't think there's a place I've ever been that's colder than Chicago in the wintertime.
Born and raised in Illinois.
So you know what it's like.
Exactly what you're talking about.
It's a type of it's a type of frigid that is really
It's a bone chiller.
It is. I remember, and again, like I said, I grew up in New England. We had snow all the time. It was very cold most of the winter. And on my first week in Chicago, we wanted to take a walk to the corner convenience store to pick up something. I don't remember what it was. And it was literally just maybe not even a quarter of a mile away. And this was at night in the middle of the winter in Chicago. And so, I just bundled up the way I normally would.
Cuts right through.
And honestly, I was fine temperature-wise, but what I was not prepared for is as I was walking maybe about a block or two, I noticed that the humidity inside my nose was freezing as I would inhale. And there was like little ice crystals forming in my nose every time I took a breath. And I had never experienced anything quite like that before. And it was a little unsettling, honestly. But yes, cold. Yeah, I think I can handle the Highlands.
There's nothing like a nice fire.
Yeah.
When it's cold like that.
Sounds lovely.
It sounds wonderful. It really
Absolutely
does.
lovely.
Joining us also tonight is Brandon Milam. I hope you're here for the next 3 hours, Brandon, because we're going to probably need you for questions.
My whole schedule just opened up just for this episode.
Wonderful. Fantastic. That's
and also, Father Chris, I got you too. I got water as well.
okay.
Yeah.
Well,
You ain't alone.
I actually have water as well. I mean,
Second half we'll have water.
I mean, it's kind of like, it's a give and take kind of thing. I have to have the yin and the yang. So it's like I take a sip of the yang and then I take a sip of the yin and I'm good. It's all about balance. And I think we're talking about balance tonight, aren't we, Brandon? So what's our first question?
Yes, we are. So the first question comes from Timothy. He asked, how can we as Catholics discern the difference between holiness and compulsive superstition?
Well, that's a good question, because I think one of the biggest problems in the Christian world, and it has been for centuries now, is scrupulosity. I would say it's one of our darkest aspects, because people will often confuse superstition and scrupulosity for a type of holiness. And you can even add a third category in there. You could also say pretension. There's a lot of people who try to put on the persona of holiness, and they don't mean it. They're not sincere about it, but they feel good about doing it because they get positive responses. I see this a lot with clergy, by the way, people that act like they're holier than thou when they're anything but. And, my philosophy has always been be as authentic as possible. That's the only surest way not to, or I should say, it's the surest way to commit the least amount of sins when you're truly authentic. But when you're trying to be something you're not, you're going to make a whole lot of mistakes, particularly when it comes to something like holiness. So that's a good question. I would say that, the way you tell the difference is, what are your intentions? Okay. And what are the intentions that you're picking up from, the people around you? So if you're talking about how can you tell from others, well, that could be more difficult. That's when you need the Holy Spirit. That's when you need the gifts of discernment. All of that comes into play. And, if you have a relationship with God, if you have a relationship with the Holy Spirit, it becomes quite easy to see these things in time. But if you're talking about trying to understand your own motives, and I know a lot of people that struggle with this. In fact, I've counseled many people over the years, even as a seminarian, about this very thing. There's books written about this in the Catholic Church, books by some really amazing writers, very gifted mystics that talk about scrupulosity and how it affects us. And by scrupulosity, for those of you who might not realize or understand the term, essentially it's a type of religiosity that extends to a point where you're constantly living out your life as though you are in fear of going to hell, and that you're fearful that every little thought you have, every little sin you commit is going to be the one that's going to condemn you, to the point that you feel like you're just not capable of being good enough so that you deserve to go to hell. And typically that scares the hell out of people. At the same time, the real problem with scrupulosity is it's completely contradictory to the gospel. It's completely contradictory to the love that Jesus Christ has for us. And that's not how we perfect ourselves. We don't perfect ourselves by becoming obsessive about sin. We become perfected by realizing our sin, realizing the state we're in, and then also realizing the remedy, which is Jesus, and understanding that we can't really do a whole lot about it, but he can and he has. And our participation, our sincere participation in that is what leads us to salvation. So, trying to avoid every little sin, trying to, become absolutely neurotic about every little thought you have that's sinful is not a life of holiness. It actually leads you in the opposite direction, and it kind of negates what Christ did on the cross, honestly, because it's making it about you. It's not about you. Okay. I mean, it is in the sense that he died for your sins as well as all of ours, but you're not the contributor to this. You're a participant in salvation, but you are not the source of where it comes from. And so it's pointless to become scrupulous about sin. Now, the inversion of that is becoming completely ambivalent to it. That's also problematic. So what you want, again, like in all things, balance. You want to be able to achieve a state of reasonable balance, being objective about things, realizing what you're doing and trying to do better, but not becoming obsessive about it, not becoming compulsive about it. And that's where you get into things like superstition. And then another side of superstition, of course, because I kind of link scrupulosity and superstition to being the same thing because it was a big problem in the Middle Ages. This is where we get our notions of the devil, by the way. If you were to take what we understand to be the devil as modern Christians today, the ancient Christians would not have recognized that concept. That was not how they saw the devil. They understood what the devil was, but that's not how they would have seen it. This Dante Inferno's kind of devil is born out of the Middle Ages, scrupulosity and superstition. It really is. The Jewish people did not have a devil like this. They didn't have a devil at all, in fact. And the concept of the Yetzer Hara and how it affects us as almost as if it's a external being is kind of the origin of our notion of the devil. But when it came into the Middle Ages, when people were very superstitious about every little thing, to the point that they saw demons everywhere, they saw devils everywhere, and there was like all these like bad luck things that you could do. This is where you started to get things like, walking under ladders, and they didn't have umbrellas yet, but that's kind of where the precursor to all that was, opening umbrellas in the house, and black cats crossing your path. Oh, that must be a familiar from a witch. This is the kind of thinking that is completely antithetical to the Christian life. We're not supposed to live in fear. We're supposed to live in confidence. Faith is about confidence. Faith is not about believing in something. Although people try to make it about belief, that's also making it about you. It's not something you do. Faith is something you are. And the only way you can be faith is by just living a life of confidence, being confident in the cross, being confident in what Jesus did for us, and realizing that that's the source of our salvation. And as long as we're sincere in that, then we're true to that. But when you start bringing in all these superstitions, thinking the devil's out to get you, thinking all these things are, all these things are bad. Like Jamie and I were talking about, a little project we're doing. And, of course, a lot of Christians would, particularly if you grew up in the 80s, you'd know what I'm talking about. They'd be terrified of what we're about to do. We're going to start a full Dungeons and Dragons campaign. We've even talked about maybe airing it on this channel so that you guys can tune in and watch the adventures along with us. We have a website that we're making that is all lore-based. I'm using AI to create it, so it's completely random. That allows me to be half dungeon master, but also half player. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to get started on this in a few weeks once we're ready to sit down and really dig our teeth into it. Back in the 80s, that was all part of the satanic panic. I think there was one kid that got killed. There was two things that happened. There were two kids in the 80s that were playing Dungeons and Dragons. Both had their characters killed. One could not deal with the death of their character because they had vested so many years into it and actually committed suicide because of it. And then another actually committed murder when they got killed by another character in the game, and they killed the person in real life that was controlling that character. And both of these things became evidence to the people of the Satanic Panic, which is all about superstition, by the way, that started this thing that Dungeons and Dragons is evil. It's of the devil. It's got devils in it, and it's some kind of ritual Satanism, some kind of cult that people were a part of.
Nah, not so much.
Not so much. It's about archetypes, and archetypes are dangerous things. And if you're one of my students, you already know this story.
Playing tarot on a board.
But even that's really problematic.
In a way, yeah.
And honestly, the Catechism of the Catholic Church considers things like divination, tarot cards, astrology to be a type of superstition as well. And certainly it is often used that way. And I will agree with the church to the degree, I will agree with the Catechism of the Roman Catholic Church to the degree that it is true that that people use these things superstitiously. They're not understanding what they're actually getting. They're not understanding what these things really are in truth. And that becomes problematic down the road. So to answer the question, it's kind of a long way around the answer, but to answer the question, it's all about sincerity. It's all about where your motives lie in this particular situation. And as long as you're living a life of faith, which means that you have full and complete confidence in the gospel message, then there's nothing that can touch you. Okay, there's nothing that can touch you. And that's the most important thing. If you're going to live a life of fear, well, that's completely contrary to the life that Jesus gave. He didn't die on the cross so that you could be afraid. He died on the cross so that you could eliminate your fears and live confidently in that salvation, that action of salvation that we all get to participate in by living the best life that we possibly can. I'm sure Father Chris can contribute more to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer for me would be to say you judge that by its fruits. So you've given a good explanation of scruples and the fruits of that actually being an unlived life, a life of kind of self-obsession and of thinking that we can save ourselves and ultimately doubting what God has done. Mm-hmm. But I think to take it to, in case the questioner also meant things like icons, statues, sacramentals, whether this is a risk of idolatry, whether they meant it in that way. Again, I'd say you have to look at the fruits of those things. If the use, for example, of an icon of Our Lady is if the fruits of that are a deeper prayer life, a commitment to the Rosary, to the Ave, to Mary devotion, to praying for the world, then those fruits are good fruits. In other words, it's not a statue of Our Lady that makes it an idol. It's how you interact with it.
Yes,
and so I think it's a good question to say, what does this do for me now? For me, I came into Catholicism by choice, and so the idea of statues and all that was quite strange to me. and so now, of course, I'm very much into all of that stuff, but it was quite strange for me.
It was strange for me too, growing up. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that wise heads say, well, don't worry about that. You don't need to be around statues of Our Lady to be a Catholic. These things are useful or not. But and I think that's a good way in. And obviously, so it's not to say that the objects themselves are neither good nor bad to a certain extent. It's how you interact with them and what the fruits of that are. And actually, but that's not to say just because if you've come from a Protestant tradition, you find that challenging. That's not to say that you shouldn't spend some time reflecting on that and trying to find the spiritual fruits in that.
I think you bring up a good point there too, with talking about the sacramentals of the church, because I think one way that people think they can safely engage in superstition in the Catholic Church is by seeing holy water and the palms from Palm Sunday and a blessed medal even the sign of the cross. We were watching Pirates of the Caribbean the other night, and one of the characters, Gibbs, is very superstitious, and he crosses himself and he spins around 3 times and he spits on the ground to try to to ward off the black mark or something like that. And and I think sometimes this is realistic. I think this is what a lot of Catholics do act like sometimes with these things. We do get people trying to get holy water from us because they think there's some kind of magic to it. These are not talismans. These are not magical amulets. Okay. They only are expressions of the faith that you yourself possess as a baptized Christian. Without that, they are nothing. They mean nothing. Even the statues themselves, the icons themselves mean nothing without the faith, which is the confident participation in the way of the gospel. They're nothing. They're just empty pieces of art, maybe beautiful, but certainly not magical in any way. So the magic of them, the grace that they possess, comes from your participation in the gospel life, your participation in the sacraments, you being a baptized Christian and being able to express that grace through these instruments of the church. That's the power. That's very different.
They can become a false sense of security.
Yes.
If you treat them like talisman, as though, well, I've just got, this is my trump card, because somebody else has done it. It's quite passive, isn't it? When you think about it, it's passive to just go to a church with your bottle and fill it up from the well of holy water.
Right.
Most churches have them. That actually doesn't take very much effort, does it?
No,
because the water's been blessed by someone else, and set aside. And so I think, without that faith that goes with it, they can actually do more harm than good for people. And so, mind you, it's out there so that people, pursue those questions, ask,
I think
what on earth is holy water?
It's to make the grace that is sometimes so intangible to us physical creatures tangible. It's just a way of being able to be that. Here's a way you can touch grace. You can feel grace. You can actually, get it on your hands and douse yourself in it. That's the point of it. But if you don't understand that, then you're missing the point of it. And it actually has the opposite effect. I think that's kind of where the epistles take us when it talks about, eating of the Eucharist unworthily, that you can eat and drink your own condemnation by doing so. I think that's the direction that it was going, is that even the Eucharist itself is not supposed to become an idol. Okay. That does not mean that, Eucharistic adoration is not legitimate. It absolutely is. But there's a difference between recognizing the presence of God in the sacramental action of the Eucharist and turning the Eucharist into an idol. And I think sometimes when you do benediction and you put the consecrated host into the monstrance and you walk around with all the regalia, it looks like you're making an idol out of it, but it's not an idol. It's quite the opposite of an idol. It's understanding what it is that you're in. And this is the difficulty, because it's complex and it's somewhat intellectual, honestly.
It's a physical reminder of your testament to faith.
Yes, but it's always about participation.
Also, the main reason it's not idolatry is because it is
Jesus,
the body of Christ, and therefore it is God, and therefore to be worshipped, because it's God that's being worshipped.
Correct.
Correct. So, but for the uninitiated, for people dropping in from, I became a Christian at a Southern Baptist church in America, and take them into a benediction service, it would look for all the world to them like idolatry, and I think
it does.
It doesn't mean it is, but that's the. That's why that there has to be catechesis along with these things. And actually, even though I'm a huge fan of exposition of the Blessed Sacrament and benediction, it's not it's not required for full participation. It's the primary sacrament is the Eucharist to be consumed.
It's about consumption. Yes.
Yeah. So, but not that there's anything wrong with adoration, Eucharistic adoration at all. But what I'm saying is, for some people, that might be a bridge too far.
I think it is for a lot of people.
That's okay.
Yeah, I think it is for a lot of people because of the just the expression of it, the way that it looks
it's intense.
It is very intense, and it's unfamiliar. It's not something that the average non-Catholic, even Orthodoxy, does not do that. Mm-hmm. They do not have Eucharistic adoration because
they sort of do, but it's very brief because it's in all of the liturgies where the after the Eucharist, when they're going to go and then put it back on the proscomidi table, they do turn to the congregation with the chalice.
Yes, they do that. Yes, they do the blessing.
And there's actually a form of benediction, but it's very subtle, and certainly
very subtle.
They don't gaze upon the.
They will not put it on display and stay kneel before it for hours on end. They do not do that. Yeah, and there's a reason. I mean, and it's interesting because even in the miracles of the Eastern Church, they are not Eucharistic. The miracles of the Eastern Church are about light, predominantly. Whereas in the miracles in the Western Church tend to be more Eucharistic in the sense of, the host and the wine turning into actual the substance of flesh and blood, it's actually quite interesting to look into some of these miracles. But people have asked me about, well, why the difference? Why is it that the Eastern Church has that expression and the Western Church has this? And I said, why wouldn't it? Because any miracle that God would give us would be about relating to the people that it's about, that it's being sent to. So Eucharistic understandings are, in this context, are more prevalent in the West. It would not service the people of the East in the same way. But the lights, particularly, we just had the Orthodox Easter where they get on the vigil and the Holy Sepulchre, the candles that miraculously light. And of course, there's a lot of controversy about that, which I'm not going to get into. But it is, again, said at least by the Orthodox Church to be a miracle that has been going on for thousands of years here. So, it's
with actual gaps too, where the periods where the church says, well, God is not providing that light for us, so
it's been a long time though, hasn't it? I mean,
yes.
Yeah. I don't remember when it last didn't happen, but I mean, it hasn't been in recent time. But you're right. They talk about the uncreated light. The uncreated light.
Which is a wonderful thing to spend some time on. People might, the Philokalia is the sort of primary book, I suppose, of Orthodox spirituality. The Philokalia, which is available online. Thing you should read under guidance, really. But it's worth. It's brilliant, and certainly kind of helps you to enter into the spiritual disciplines of the Eastern Church.
I've got all 3 volumes in the library. Oh, 4. There's 4 volumes of it. I think I have them all. My bishop gave them to me, honestly.
I think they're probably the ones translated by Callistos Ware.
I think they might be.
The late great. So he was one of my lecturers at Oxford. He was a brilliant man.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But so I mean, I think there's the answer. I think what Father Chris said was really well done.
So walk the middle path.
Middle path.
Strong in your faith.
Strong in your faith.
And don't stray off the path.
And
don't walk in fear. And don't walk in fear.
And look at the fruits. I think that's very important. Look at the fruits of action. I mean, that's very scriptural.
Use your discernment.
Yeah. Well, people don't have discernment, so you have to pray for it. The discernment isn't something that typically comes natural. It's something that you have to pray for. It is a gift of the Holy Spirit. It is not something that you automatically get. It's not something you're entitled to have.
Ask for it.
You have to ask for it, and you have to be, demonstrate, I think, to a certain degree, at least to yourself, that you're capable of respecting it, because it is perhaps the most important gift outside of love.
But also God has given us a church, and so we also sound it off against other people. And,
sure.
Primarily your pastor where you are, who is most engaged in your spiritual walk. Yeah, I mean, we're supposed. That's why we gather as a church. We are not Christians in isolation.
That's supposed to be.
No, even if the people you're sounding it off, if you like, are the fathers of the church, reading books, checking it out. One thing we do know is that God does not do a 180-degree change in how he operates. No, and so, if we're trying to discern in our life, and it's something that seems to be completely out of character of the scriptures and of the revealed will of God, then probably we're discerning something that's not from God.
Agreed. And I would also say that discernment is always a gentle confidence in experience. It's never going to be some kind of shocking revelation. It is always something that feels intuitively to be sincere and right and gentle. And I can't emphasize that enough, because I think sometimes people mistake all sorts of
and not to be extended out. Like, some things most things that are discerned in our spiritual lives are just for us.
Yeah, just for us. Yeah.
So
correct.
So it's not to say, well, this has been revealed to me there, and now I've got to get everybody in the church to do.
Yeah, it doesn't work like that. Yeah, it does not work like that. That's the problem with Pentecostalism, honestly, is that, they're not only are they not really putting much value in discernment, but they're focusing on the wrong things like speaking in tongues and prophecy, and let's be honest, these are the least, if any, of the gifts of the Spirit.
A little more subtle than that.
And there's nothing that could be more abused.
Not that important.
Not at all.
My experience of these things is, and I've been to Pentecostal churches, the same people riding around at the same time on Sunday every week. I don't think God's that convenient.
I've never known him to be all that convenient.
and in all of that, I've very rarely heard any interpreter of tongues.
No, they don't have that one. They ignore. They ignore that one.
Yeah, and I think they should pay full attention to St. Paul, who basically says, "Don't do it." And it's certainly not. It's not edifying for. I think, didn't he call it your rational worship? That when the church gathers, that's why it's kind of like, well, these things that's not for. I mean, we obviously in the Catholic Church, we would say the Eucharistic gathering, but it's not for the formal prayers of the church. These things might be the gifts that, I don't know. My suspicion is that there are far more people claiming to speak in tongues than are being inspired to.
I agree
the demons speak in tongues too.
Well, they do. It's one of the things that we look for in our assessment of demonic possession is the speaking in tongues. And honestly, I think it's also something that could be very, very quickly fabricated subconsciously. I really do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's problematic.
Even from a genuine person, who wants to just love God,
Yes.
But I remember, because I came to faith through the Baptists in England, and I remember, we had to go on a Holy Spirit weekend. And the whole pressure of that weekend was to experience extraordinary things of the Holy Spirit. And I remember these weren't horrible people; these were good people. But I remember the pressure that was.
Because if you don't have it, then there's something wrong with you. You're not making the right connection. What's wrong with you, Father? But
I did hold my ground, and I just said no. I said, I was open-minded, and I kind of went along with these things. But I said, this just doesn't strike me as something genuine, and I'm not going to fake something for the sake of
just
it. I don't need to, And I was convinced about the resurrection of Christ already. So it just felt to me like it was a sort of cherry on the cake I didn't need,
I've never seen the value. I know a lot of people that.
And now I don't think it's a cherry at all.
No.
But there you go. Yeah.
I mean, I've known people that have made their entire Christianity about it. I've known many people in my life that were like that. And they're missing the point.
Which comes back to making it too personal.
It's a type of superstition, isn't it, Father? It's another superstition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's good enough for me. Like, what's good enough for me is the witness of the apostles who went to their martyrdom rather than deny the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's
that
enough
says
for
a
me.
lot.
I don't need
Yep.
any more than that. And so,
why would you want more than that, right?
well, what could be more than that?
Exactly. I mean, that should be more than enough, I think. So there's the answer to the question, Brandon. What's the next one?
Comprehensive answer.
I think so.
Yeah, look.
Well, we have time for it tonight, so we can do that.
So this question comes from Tiffany, and I had seen that you had answered it before, but your answer needed a little bit more than just a couple paragraphs.
Okay.
But her question is, what is Baphomet? People keep saying it's a demon, but when I look at the picture,
That guy
I
right
see
there.
balance.
That guy.
Balance. Yeah. Well, balance is the correct occult understanding of it. No, Baphomet is not a demon, despite the fact that the Church of Satan would love for you to think that, because that's part of their game. Okay, so they use the goat of Mendes as sort of a ploy to just invoke fear and agitation, because all that the Church of Satan is about is the negation of the Christian life. So they have no identity outside of how Christianity defines themselves. They have no identity outside of Christianity. Okay. And that goes for whether you're talking about the completely secularized Church of Satan types, or if you're talking about the Satanists that actually do believe that there is a fallen angel that can be worshipped. Okay.
In some ways, though, that's utterly consistent, isn't it? Because the devil is defined by what he is not.
Is what he is not.
You know?
Yeah. At least they're being consistent. Yeah.
God is defined by I am who is. That, you know,
Yes.
I know what I'm about.
Yes.
The devil is always, you know, on the, you know, so there's a cat. For though it makes me laugh with the secular Satanists who are, you know, they don't believe in God at all. I mean, that, you know, they're not devil worshippers. They're secularists. It kind of amuses me that they end up fulfilling the role of the being they say they don't believe in. Anyway,
well, and I think, I mean, no, you're not. I mean, that's a good contribution, because it's exactly in the direction I'm going here. So to answer what Baphomet is, you have to understand that the entirety of the concept is based in error. Okay. There's no truth to it. It's all just fabrications that have been compounded upon others, to the point that it doesn't really have any identity anymore. Not that it ever really did. So, you know, initially, it was probably, the result of a error in the old French, because there was a lot of, you know, you have to understand the Middle Ages, Islam was a big problem. Okay. It was constantly, Western civilization was constantly under threat from the East, with Muslim invasion pushing further and further into European territory. And I mean, that was the whole point of the Crusades. That was the whole point of, even to a certain extent, the Spanish Inquisition was also to kind of root some of this stuff out. So it comes back to the fact that there was a lot of writing going on at the time. And, you know, not everybody was terribly proficient in what they needed to be able to pass this stuff on for posterity. So it is believed that, you know, during the time that the Knights Templar were growing in power. In fact, we get our modern day banking system from them, which I find actually quite interesting, considering how the Bible condemns usury, which it defines as any kind of interest on a loan, not just, you know, reasonable interest. The only reasonable interest is zero. Yet they turned it entire.
Well, that's why Christians needed Jews, of course.
There you go. And so,
well, that's the origin of it.
I know. Yeah,
that's why you know the anti-Semitic tropes about them.
Tropes, yeah.
You know,
yeah,
it's
true.
But it's because actually Christians were using Jews
as a way of getting around it. Yeah,
as a way. Yeah. Because if they did it, well, they're not Christians.
Yeah.
You know.
But they were, because they had creating a banking system, and as anybody knows from capitalism and corporate America, or any kind of understanding of the modern day banking system, it's lucrative to be a banker, and so they were growing in power, and there were people that didn't like this. Okay, so they started making up things about them, and one of the things that they made up about them is that they were worshiping a false god. And so it was rumored to be that they were worshiping actually Muhammad, like the Muslims do, because they thought Muslims worship Muhammad too. They didn't understand the theology of Islam, that it was the same God. It's just, Muhammad was a prophet that they put in very high esteem, but they weren't worshiping Muhammad. They never did. And nor did the Knights Templar worship anything other than God. But this was the rumor that was made up. And so there was a scribe that had written down Mohammed, which in the Old French is Mohammed. Instead of putting Mohammed down, he put down Baphomet, which when written out, because ET in French usually makes an ace and the T silent, Baphomet. And that's where we got this. And so it was attached to, this is the thing that the Knights Templar are worshiping. And then it was soon after that it's like, well, because Muhammad in Islam was seen as the religion of the devil, rumors started to get, well, I saw them bowing down to a goat head. So this Baphomet that they're worshiping, which is actually, it was just a mispronunciation of the French word for Muhammad, is that this must be the God that they worship. Now, of course, there were occultists many hundreds of years later that capitalized on this. One of them is Aleister Crowley. Okay, because he loved anything that could become controversial and anything that could be used in such a way. And then there was actually a very respectable occultist that came around, a little earlier than that, was Eliphas Levi. Okay, and he drafted the image of the goat and Mendes that we now understand to be Baphomet, which is right over there. And that became the occult symbol for wisdom through balance. Had nothing to do with the devil, had nothing to do with anything, but there was a Gnostic connotation to it, which is where the occult system derived from. So this is where it becomes important, because in some of the earlier 1700s, 1800s writings about Gnosticism, they also felt that the word Baphomet really came from the Greek word Baphomet metos, which is basically baptism into wisdom. Okay, baptism, being baptized in wisdom is kind of how it evolved. And when you put those Greek words together and then you reduce them down to some kind of English corruption, you get Baphomet from that. So baptism from wisdom, and so there's a lot of different origin points through this. A lot of it was just the occultists expanding on it, gravitating towards it. The idea of the image that we see here, which looks like, of course, a fallen goat angel kind of thing, which is very much reminiscent of how people in the modern era see the devil. They're not understanding also that we're talking about a sacrificial animal in the same sense that, if Jesus is the Lamb of God, then, that brings through salvation, then this is the sacrificial animal that brings about wisdom. The horns are seen as rising up to heaven to connect us to the divine wisdom. And then, of course, as above, so below. So you have the one hand pointing up, one hand pointing down. You have the sun and the moon, and that is the balance, the center point, the middle point between yin and yang. Very powerful occult symbol. It's also an androgynous figure. You have a female breast, but you also have the erect penis in the center. And again, this is representative very much in the same sense of Tibetan Buddhism with their yabyums. If you don't know what a yabyum is, it's basically it's a Buddha having intercourse with his consort, but she's sitting on top of him, and they're going at it. But it's again a symbol. This is Buddhist iconography, very sexually graphic compared to what we see in the West, but it represents again the union of male and female to create. So it's the power of creation. It's divine. It is powerful. It is the source of all things coming into being.
So it's comparable to yin and yang.
It is yin and yang.
Right.
It's basically the Western version of yin and yang in the occult mystery tradition. But the word Baphomet, it gets its origins from these other things. It didn't become satanic until Aleister Crowley really started playing with the idea, because anything Crowley got involved in.
Well, didn't LaVey jump all over it too?
Well, that's because of Crowley.
Right.
And because Crowley was considered to be the most wicked man in the world, and he loved that
and he
representation.
absolutely was not.
No, he wasn't, I wouldn't say he was a great person.
No.
But, he was definitely, he just gloried in it. He had a very strict Christian upbringing. He hated his parents for it.
He was a rebel.
And he was the product of a life of basically rebellion against what he was raised into. And then it just evolved into his degradation into power seeking through the occult. And if you look at the early pictures of Crowley and look at his later life, you don't even recognize the man. You can see that it took a toll on him. But he did equate this image from Eliphas into this, Baphomet that we know. And you see it on Crowley's devil card in the Crowley Thoth Tarot deck.
Yeah.
You can see that it's basically a type of Baphomet. And so today, the Church of Satan jumped all over that, made that its symbol. And then they put up these statues next to the courthouses with the Ten Commandments, just to be provocative. And they use freedom of speech and freedom of religion and separation of church and state, as a weapon against.
Was that Missouri?
It was in Missouri, I think. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. And then they're trying to get Satanist literature handed out to kids in grammar school, because if they're like, well, if you can have your moment of silence and you can have your prayer at the morning of in the morning before class, then we can have our religion represented too. They don't have a religion, and they know they don't have a religion. It's all done
anti-religion.
It's all done as a provocation to basically undo and attack the tradition of the last 2,000 years. So I guess in that sense, it is very satanic, but, they appropriated the image of Baphomet into their own design. It has nothing to do with the devil. It has nothing to do with Christianity. It is truly an occult image that was drafted out of a Gnostic concept of how we connect with wisdom. So you could almost say, and I know this would make a lot of Orthodox Christians cringe, but you could almost say that Baphomet is equivalent to Sophia in the Gnostic Christian Valentinian sense. You could actually say that. It's hard for people to fathom, but it's the truth. So, Baphomet's not one thing, but I can tell you right now, it's many different things, but the one thing it's not is the devil.
Right.
I don't know, Brandon. What do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I'd say that's a pretty good answer, because I had shown a couple people when I first found out that the picture on your wall is not the devil. It's Baphomet.
It's Baphomet. It's not the devil.
I had shown the picture to someone, I think it was at my old job, and they asked, why do you have a picture of the devil? But it's not the devil. And come to find out, on the, what was it, the 1912 illustration on the tarot card with the devil, apparently it's not the devil, it's Baphomet on the card.
And the devil is not the devil in the tarot deck. The tarot deck, the meaning of the devil card has nothing to do with Satan or anything Christian in that sense. The devil card is about becoming a slave to the realm of the material. Selling your soul to material attachment is what the card means. I guess you could say that's what the devil's all about if you're looking at it from an archetypal standpoint, but it's not satanic in that sense because, well, if it is, then I can tell you right now, every single one of you are satanic because we're all in an unhealthy way attached to the material world in some form or fashion. And we haven't learned how to overcome that. That's part of the imperfection of the fallen world. And that's part of what we're learning through salvation is to let go, release. There's this wonderful prayer that's chanted in an Orthodox liturgy, in the divine liturgy. Let us put away all worldly cares. Sometimes it's actually repeated more than once. And this is exactly what it's about. It's about not becoming slave to sin, not becoming. So in a lot of ways, when the devil card shows up in a reading, it's actually a good thing. It doesn't mean that you're, some evil creatures after you. What it means is it's a recognition that you're far too attached to the things that don't matter. You need to start focusing on the things that do. So I actually, when I do a tarot reading and I see the devil, it's actually a wake-up call. But it should not invoke fear. I don't have fear. As a Christian who has full confidence in the cross, I don't have the luxury of fear. And I don't give into it at all. I don't feel it anymore. I never did. Honestly, I never really did. I can't even think, even the most terrifying things that ever happened to me in my life, and I've had a lot of terrifying things happen to me, I can say that out of all the things I did feel in those moments, fear was not one of them. And I really do attribute my faith to the reason why that is true, because they're not compatible realities. Faith and fear do not go together. You cannot have one with the other. You are either one or the other. You can't have both.
Putting aside all earthly fears is also, and this is related, of course, the appeal to Christ saying, consider the lily of the field, the birds of the air.
Yes.
They don't fret about these things.
Yes.
And so, it is that, that's a driving message of Jesus, is that we're not supposed to waste our time in worrying about earthly things to the detriment of, and I don't mean this in a Gnostic way, because I think the Gnostics were wrong, the Gnostic Christians.
Well, the world's not evil. That's where they got it wrong.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nor is there special secret knowledge that a Christian's got to acquire. So they're things I'm rejecting.
Yeah.
But really, Jesus' message is to say, unhealthy attachment to these things, is just simply a distraction from what is more important.
Right. So Baphomet represents understanding, the wisdom, and if you want to put it into a Gnostic context, which of course does not have a great deal of Christian application, although I think it does have some. I mean, St. Paul does talk about.
We don't know because they lost the argument and we destroyed all of their records.
We did. And I think that, it's unfortunate, but I don't think it all went away. I mean, I can tell you now, the Holy Trinity as it is understood today with, concepts like homoousios and other theology that comes out of Trinitarian concepts is absolutely Gnostic contribution. They're the ones that understood the idea of an emanation of God.
The only things you really know about the Gnostics that were, part of the church or informing the church is what was written against them.
Yeah, it's true.
So Sibelius, for
example,
example,
and the parts that they did adopt because they liked them. And there's a few of those, like I would say, cherry picking. I would say that, a lot of people are shocked by this, but it's absolutely true. The puritanical notions that sex is like dirty, that comes from Gnostics, because the Jewish people have always been very matter of fact about sexuality, almost to a point that would make some Christians feel uncomfortable because
it can be an awkward conversation.
It can, and it's very natural to them.
Statistically, they still have the most sex.
They do. I mean, and I think it's because they're not embarrassed by it. They don't have hang-ups about it, and I think that's a very good, healthy thing to be. We should aspire to some of that. But where Christians started to get this, sex is dirty kind of notion, that's a Gnostic contribution, because they used to say that if you were bringing children into this world, you were imprisoning their souls into the demiurge's prison.
This evil place.
And that's an evil thing to do. Why would you ever do that? So,
well, and you can see why the early church had to resist that, because what does that say about the incarnation?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exactly.
So it's right that the early church said, no, we can't.
Well, Valentinus had a solution for that, but nobody wanted to listen to it. He did have a solution for that, but yes, you're right. From the vantage point of what became what was proto-Orthodox theology and became the standard theology of the Council of Nicaea, and pretty much written in stone from that point forward, has no need for this. And I think ultimately why Gnosticism was thrown out is because there was no need for that level of philosophical convolution. I really think that it reached a point where it can be much more simple than this. It's already complex enough. Do we really need to rock the boat with all of these radical philosophical concepts that only make it more difficult for the average person to understand? So, I could be wrong, but when you read the fathers of the church and you read people like Irenaeus and Athanasius, who really, hated Gnosticism, you can see, if you read between the lines of what they wrote about it, you can see that I think really what they're saying is this is just overly complicated and it can lead people astray. So we don't need this. And then, of course, there were some Gnostics that did some crazy stuff, and that didn't help the opinion any, because Gnosticism was not one thing. We cannot say, oh, here are the Gnostics. There was no such thing as Gnostics. There were people that had Gnostic concepts integrated into what they were doing, but there was many different groups. You had Sethians, you had Valentinians were the primary ones, but you also had other ones, someone that were doing very licentious things. We get confused, the Nicolaitans Church gets confused with the Nicolaitans.
I got an education on that. Well, doesn't Gnosticism come from? Doesn't it mean wisdom or knowledge?
It does. Yeah, Gnostic is the Greek word for knowledge. Yeah. Gnostic, that's Greek for knowledge, but it was a specific kind of knowledge. But even St. Paul talks about, the epignosis, and epignosis is literally the fitting upon of a specific kind of knowledge. So even St. Paul would have understood that, you have your faith and you have your works, okay, but you also have to understand what you're doing. You can't do this blindly and ignorantly and expect to be able to function. The thing where he would differ, and I differ too, which I agree with St. Paul, and this is, I guess, what makes me more conventional than Gnostic, is the fact that I don't think it's secret wisdom. I think it's the wisdom that you absolutely need to have, and it's available to everybody if you pay attention and learn it.
Yeah,
but the Gnostics didn't say that. Gnostics said, no, we're gonna initiate you into this, and you don't get it right away. So it operated a lot like a secret society. And that's where it becomes problematic.
Say cult?
Well,
because it just fundamentally went against the whole essence of the gospel, which was that salvation was a free gift of God for all.
It is.
And so any notion that this could be, sheathed in something that could be controlled by various groups of people was just anathema to it. And
it was problematic.
Anathema.
It was. All right. Well, let's take our break here. We're a little past the top of the hour, but we're going to take our break here. We'll come back and get one more question from the ether and then start taking yours. Don't go away. Welcome back, everybody, to the second part of Vestiges After Dark. We are doing open lines, open topics tonight, and after we finish questions from the ether with Brandon, we'll start getting to your questions in the chat room, and hopefully some of you will even decide to call into the show. It's always nice to talk with members of our audience. The number to call is 718-362-6380. That's 718-362-6380. Remember to enter PIN number 855-4111, 855-4111 to be placed into the queue. We'll be continuing the conversation in just a moment. Don't go away. Okay, Brandon, what's our third and final question from the ether tonight? I know we're taking things a little bit slower tonight because we have the time to do so, so it makes perfect sense.
All right, so the third question comes from me. Why is the metaphor of a lion used to describe both God and the devil?
In the scriptural context, you're talking about scriptural symbology?
Yes.
Well, yeah, you got, the ferocity of God, is often represented in various places in the ancient world.
The Lion of Judah.
The Lion of Judah, yeah. And then, of course, you have, the devil prowling around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. And that's because lions are both ferocious and cunning. So both of those qualities are qualities that the ancient person as a symbol could look at and understand immediately. Everything in Scripture was written in a sort of sense that appealed to I want to say the metaphorical sensibilities of the ancient person. So it was a way for people, remember, okay, I've said this before on the Nicolay Network, and I don't think I've ever mentioned it on this show, but I think it's worth mentioning now. The ancient people did not have CGI. They didn't have like crazy, Hollywood movies and ways to experience movies in such realistic forms. They just had storytelling. And so in order to have your audience understand a message to the point that they felt it, you had to use symbology that they could relate to. A lion was a perfect representation of bravery and ferocity, but also risk and cunning. So, a lion is a good representation of both of those things, depending upon how you're applying them. And it's something that the ancient person would have been able to relate to in a sense that they can feel that message. It's not just enough to tell somebody something. You have to be able to, if you really are good at telling the story, you have to tell it in such a way that they can feel it. And today we're spoiled with, technology that makes it very easy to tell these stories in a way that we can feel them, which is why people can go to the, horror movie and get frightened. I mean, I don't think I've ever been to a horror movie where people didn't scream in the audience, because the movies are just so realistic that they can feel them. But in the ancient world, if you were going to tell a scary story, you had to do it in such a way that that they could feel it without all of the pomp and circumstance of modern technology. And so what you would use is archetypes that the ancient person could relate to.
Well, back then the lion would have been one of the most powerful creatures they could akin it to.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so they wanted to express that, God's power and ferocity is like a lion, but the devil is also something to be, very cautious of. It's dangerous like a lion. It's cunning like a lion. So they're just analogies. It's just ways to be able to convey a message.
There is another animal that represents both the devil and God in the Bible, and that's the snake.
There you go.
So you have the serpent in the garden,
yes.
Of course, representing, and then you have the serpent of brass.
Yes,
that,
which is very interesting. It's interesting when you think about it, because that's a precursor to Jesus being raised on the cross.
And quoted by Jesus
in
John 3.
Exactly. So he even used it himself.
Yeah.
Well, there's even more esoteric reasons behind that too, which is such a can of worms to get into. But I could kind of allude to it here by saying that there's a reason that the devil, as we understand him in the modern era as New Testament Christians, is a very different figure than how ancient Jews would have understood the same concept in the Old Testament, which was not a devil at all, and they really didn't have a concept of the devil. It was like I said, Yetzirah was how they would have interpreted the snake in the garden. It is the proclivity. It's an internal proclivity, but hardly anything that would be this fallen angel type of thing. You got Enoch, and you have some apocalyptic literature that sort of shifts that, and you start to see that with the Essenes. So, around the time of the New Testament, the Essenes started to personify concepts that originally for the preceding 2,000 years would have been seen as strictly concepts. They started to personify them into individuals, into powerful creatures, mythical creatures almost, to the point that now you started to have things like something that's more familiar to how we would see the devil today. But there's a reason for that, and there's a reason that you don't really see the devil take an appearance in the Old Testament until the temptation in the desert. And I've said this briefly on the show again. I'm going to say it briefly again now. The devil, as we understand in the New Testament concept, comes from one thing. It's when Christ strips out of human nature the Yetzirah so that he can incarnate it. He can't incarnate something that is perfect. That is not perfect, rather. He has to incarnate something that is perfect. So this is part of the reason of the theology of the Virgin Mary, why she is without sin. But it's also, so outside of the Immaculate Conception, taking that out of it for a minute and just reducing it down to what we're now seeing in terms of how would a perfect being incarnate sinful human flesh? How could a perfect being take on sinful human flesh? Well, very simply, he'd have to get rid of the part of it that's sinful and make it perfect. And that's what he did. But where did that go? Where did the Yetzirah go from that matter? Because he did incarnate matter that was already here, just like everyone else, right? I mean, he didn't create something that was not here before. Even we are the product of billions of years of stardust just coming together into the form of atoms. The body that made up Jesus in the incarnation was not any different than the matter that was already here. So he had to incarnate that matter in such a way that he, in his perfect nature, could do so. That would be that he'd have to remove the Yetzirah from the equation. So where did the Yetzirah go? Well, it's what the devil is. That's why we have this very personified antithesis to Jesus that doesn't really show up until his temptation in the desert, because that's where that's where he confronts it for the first time. And it's a significant moment in the story of Jesus. It's significant enough that the gospel writers decided to tell us about it. I'm sure he had other things that we don't, that he encountered that we don't know about because they weren't written down, or maybe he never shared them with his apostles. But that was one that was shared, and that was one that we do know about, and it's significant for this reason.
Kind of like a snake shedding a snake skin.
Yeah, well, there you go. And so that is also getting back to what we were saying about the staff in the desert with the serpent. It's kind of why there's a similar symbology there esoterically, because Jesus and the devil kind of come from the same place, in the sense that in order for a perfect God to incarnate human flesh, well, it kind of created the antithesis by nature of what it had to be. Not because he wanted to create the devil, but because in order to do what he had to do here in the fallen world, the consequence of that creates the devil. Okay, so now instead of having Yetzirah built within us, his Yetzirah, which is a very powerful one because it's coming right directly out of a person because of the incarnation itself, produces what we now understand to be Satan. So I am of the opinion, okay, that the devil as Lucifer or some fallen angel is a bunch of bullshit. The devil that's a good story to tell to try to convey it to human minds, but that's not at all what it is. It's truly the removal of Yetzirah from the flesh that Christ himself incarnated in order to do so.
So you're telling me the fall of Lucifer is taken out of context? What?
Well, I mean, look, the fall of Lucifer is this is again an expression, okay, that, I'm not discounting the existence of fallen angels, because I deal with those.
We faced
one more than one. So yeah, fallen angels exist, but what I'm saying is that what we are talking about in the New Testament that Jesus confronts in the desert is not Lucifer, is not Satan in the traditional sense of a fallen angel. These are, first of all, these are concepts. They're not people. Lucifer in itself is also a misrepresentation, a mistranslation. Again, that gets very complicated. But what I am saying is that what Jesus is confronting in the desert is the Yetzirah that was removed from his from the matter that he incarnated, because he had to make that matter perfect in order to incarnate it. Because God could not incarnate something that's fallen, and that's how he could have human nature but still be perfect. It's the only way to do it. And God's not going to, create some kind of some kind of contradiction. He's not going to create a paradox in order to make some kind of miracle happen. He's going to do it within the framework that actually makes sense, because he's not here for his sake. He didn't come here to wow us with his awesome powers. He came here for our sake. So he's going to work with us at our level, and he's not going to change the universe. He's going to make it possible for us to change the universe with him over the course of the path of salvation, which is the church. So that's what I am saying. But fallen angels are a real thing. They're just not what we're being told they are. I don't subscribe to Enoch. I think that's a nice archetypal story. But Enoch is not a historical event any more than the Garden of Eden is a historical event. What are angels? Well, they're principles within the cosmos itself. They are, look at how the church defines the choirs of angels. Okay, you have the angels and the archangels. They kind of are familiar because you have guardian angels and you have the archangels that we hear about, Gabriel and Michael. So those are somewhat familiar from the stories in Scripture. But when you get into things like principalities and virtues, even cherubim, seraphim, and they are very clearly stated, these are realities that are so far beyond us that we really can only describe them in some kind of metaphorical way. We're not capable of really truly understanding the reality of these things. But the church does teach us a little bit through the saints and some, visions and mystics and whatnot over the hundreds of years of what these kinds of other types of these higher choirs of angels, what they really are: virtues, principalities, dominions, all these things. And they kind of control the forces of nature. They're not here to kind of involve themselves in human affairs. They're kind of like, science calls it dark matter. Well, why aren't galaxies spinning themselves apart when they should? Well, the church's theological answer to the reason why galaxies don't spin apart is because virtues, powers, dominions, they hold these forces together. They control the forces of the cosmos that create consistency when we broke it. See, creation didn't need any of this help until we messed it up. And so these forces come together to be able to make it possible for the universe to still be here, despite the fact that we've really done so much damage to it that it shouldn't be here anymore. We should have actually destroyed it by now. It's these higher angels that keep it together. This is good Christian theology, by the way. I mean, I'm kind of expanding on the notion, but I don't think there's really a Christian theologian that would disagree with what I said. They might disagree when we get to the devil, but that's again because I see things in the original Jewish concept of Yetzer Hara. I'm saying, well, we can't make that leap. You have to explain the leap if you're going to make the leap, and you can't use Enoch. That's not even a canonical scripture. All right, so Enoch's all well and good, and maybe it was revered by the ancient Jews, but it's not a good explanation if you're really trying to get into the metaphysics of what happened. It makes much more sense to understand who Jesus is in context to Yetzer Hara and how he has to deal with that in this sense and what kind of effect that would produce. So that makes the devil real, but not in the sense that we would understand it. So what are these fallen angels then? Well, what happens when you have these perfect forces of creation entering into the expression of our fallen reality? How does that affect those forces? Well, they fall too, don't they? So it's a different story. I get that, because we want to believe there's a war in heaven and they all got pissed off because God was favoring us and the angels didn't think that was fair. And then we got free will and they didn't. I mean, that's great. Yeah, it's great for explaining it to the ancient mind. It's great for explaining it to even a mind that doesn't necessarily have the ability to go beyond philosophically these things. But it's not really great for somebody that is trying to understand the metaphysics of what happened. And so I'm not trying to give you a theological explanation. I'm trying to give you a metaphysical one, because that tends to be a little bit more complete in the sense that it fills in the gaps that the story leaves out. And so you're kind of like, well, if there was no fall before man, then how could angels have rebelled? Wouldn't that mean evil came before us? Then wouldn't that mean that it's not our fault? You see, it becomes very philosophically problematic if you really take Enoch literally and say, well, there was something that happened before us. And that gets us to the serpent in the garden. I mean, how are we to blame for that? I mean, you know, you leave two toddlers alone with a pedophile, and if something happens, how is it the toddler's fault? I mean, if you read it that way, then you're kind of saying, well, isn't that kind of victim shaming? I mean, isn't the Adam and Eve story kind of victim shaming? I mean, it wasn't their fault. They were seduced. They didn't even know better. See, that's where I have a problem with it. But if you get rid of Enoch, if you throw that one out, okay, and you just understand the metaphysics of what happened, then it makes perfect sense. And honestly, this is where the Jewish theology excels. Yetzer Hara makes so much more sense than anything we came up with in our archetypal stories as Christians. It makes much more sense. But see, Christians were influenced by apocalypticists. And the Essenes and the fourth way of Judaism was very influential in what became Christianity later on. And that's how we ended up with these stories. But, you know, I try to see the big picture. And you're free to disagree with me. Go ahead. I mean, that's okay. But understand that I have studied this for the last 30 plus years with some of the greatest minds that I had access to. And, you know, this is the kind of stuff we talk about at the monastery. You know, this is what Cistercian conversation is like, if you were wondering. You know, this is kind of the stuff we go down, the rabbit holes, because every night we'd sit with a brandy or a cognac and go down rabbit holes like this. And this is kind of what influenced me to understand the larger picture. So I devoted myself to the larger picture, but this is not stuff that's talked about in the general population, which is why the average Christian doesn't know about it. And of course, understand, I'm not teaching pulpit stuff here. I mean, Christians are free to take the traditional vantage point. There's nothing wrong with the traditional vantage point, by the way. There's nothing wrong with the story of the fall of the angels and all that. If you want to go that route, there's an archetypal truth to that, and it's no less accurate. It's just not going to give you, if you really philosophize the way I do, it's not going to give you the complete picture until you put together the metaphysics that goes with it. And so, you know, I think that's why Vestiges After Dark exists, because, I mean, I can teach you things from the pulpit behind this wall, but on the other side of this wall, I can teach you a little bit more, if that makes sense, you know, because I have limits to where I can go when I'm dressed in vestments at the pulpit.
Well, it's more about the the principle that the liturgy and certainly preaching at Mass is about essential matters.
Yes.
Primarily.
Yeah.
And so, and actually in every type of church, this is true.
Yes, it is.
That's for the essential things. And then, you can have your Bible studies, you can have your, alternative spaces for talking about different small groups, cell groups. So I think it's quite appropriate because the responsibility of the priest celebrating Mass is in a sense to keep it to that. It's why you shouldn't have devotional acts as part of the Mass. We don't pray the rosary halfway through Mass.
That's right. We don't just go off on a tangent halfway through.
Yeah, I mean, it's even controversial. I mean, it's a tradition in England. The prayers of the faithful at the Mass are ended with the Hail Mary, and I mean, it's a tradition in Anglican and Catholic churches in this country. Yeah. I shouldn't say this country. I'm in Scotland at the moment, but in England it is.
Let's not start a problem.
Because it's definitely not in Scotland because they had John Knox and all those problems. But I was in Perth earlier in the week, and that's where he preached his famous homily, and then they went and destroyed all the monasteries. But anyway, what was I going to say? Before I went off on that tangent, ending prayers with the Hail Mary, and that there have been Catholic bishops that have written to their clergy to remind them that the Ave Maria is a devotional act and not a fundamental part of the Mass, and therefore really ought not to be used. Not that there's anything wrong with that prayer, but it's about the context of that prayer.
Correct. Yeah, that's exactly true. And then there's a reason for this. I mean, it sounds like, from the layperson's vantage point, it sounds like it's just being too technical, but there's a reason for why there's certain things that are allowable and certain things that are not. Like I know sometimes that people get upset with me when I have to remind them that at the Our Father, the priest raises his hands. You do not.
Correct.
And worse, don't hold hands. Okay, that's not. There's a certain particular form to this, and people are like, oh, you're being too technical. It's just technical. What's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that, but there is something wrong with that.
Yes, there is.
And if you don't understand all of the theology that leads up to why it's a problem, then you really just have to take our word for it. If you're not going to take the time to understand it.
There's a really easy human way to understand the difference between Mass and everything else, and that's that Mass is not voluntary. Mass is not optional. Mass is compulsory. You have to be there, and therefore, because it's a compulsory injunction that we all have to gather and be at the Mass, we can't make it overly personal. Or it has to be as far as possible the essentials. And no more than the essentials, really, because otherwise we then start to divide the community. And so not just locally, but globally. I mean, Catholics have a sense that the universal and the local church are simultaneous.
Yes.
And so if there's wild devotional things going on in a church in Scotland, that aren't going on, and very different traditions going on in the church in New Zealand, that is a problem because the church is supposed to simultaneously be local and universal. So it's a bit like I went to Alcatraz when I was in San Francisco just after I'd been with you guys, and there was let's say a very young tour guide there, let's be kind, and she'd written on a whiteboard, she was obviously an activist, she'd written on a whiteboard, why is it that prisoners get free health care and Americans not in prison don't? And I thought, well, if you can't figure that out, then the difference is that the prisoners are compelled to be in jail and not free to go out and get their healthcare options elsewhere. And so given that we put them in a box, then we've got to provide healthcare for them as well. So that's really the essence of why the Mass is not to be
and it's
so
not
esoteric.
the best healthcare either. It's the bare minimum.
It's whatever
It's the bare minimum.
what they can get by with legally.
Trust me, it's the bare minimum.
Yeah, you used to work
Yeah.
in jail, so you know.
I spent 4 years working in a county jail. Yeah.
All right, so Jamie, let's get to our first question. I know you said you had one
So
there.
Jimmy's got 2 questions, and the first one's a little more involved. The second one was just he asked if we ever get scared when we go into into exorcisms, and
No.
the answer is no, quite
No.
the opposite.
Not the-
I get
not
like a
at all.
schoolgirl and get all excited and can't wait to kick ass. So
Yeah,
no, we don't go in there afraid at all. I have not been afraid.
I have never felt fear.
I get
honestly.
excited. Honestly, I get excited because I know who's got my back. So it's.
I mean, I think my fear response is somewhat broken, so I might not be the best example.
Mine's gotten broken over the years.
I just don't feel it. You know, I just don't feel fear under any circumstances. You know, I mean, I think I mentioned, back with my Chicago days, I had a gun held to my head in the South Side. And the guy was ready to shoot me. And I can honestly tell you in that moment, I felt nothing. I felt no fear whatsoever. There was just only peace, honestly. The only real negative thing I feel on a fairly regular basis is frustration
Yeah, I get
/
angry.
agitation,
Yeah.
which kind of makes me angry from time to time because I'm a very tolerant person. I don't have any prejudices except I'm extremely prejudiced and bigoted against stupidity. I really am. I'm a bigot when it comes to stupidity. I really am. And I don't hold back. And, but fear? No, I've never felt fear going into a case. I've never felt fear going into anything. What's the point of fear? What can anybody do to me? What's the worst thing you kill me?
Well, it's like I tell people.
I mean, I'm going to die anyway.
I tell people, 26 years in law enforcement. Yeah, I felt fear then because humans are unpredictable.
Well, yeah,
but
that's
when
true.
you're dealing with the spiritual, there's rules, and so that you know your faith. You're going in there with a little bit more than you would.
But I suspect, Jamie, that partly the reason that you get excited and calm are the same reasons I'm excited and calm under extreme circumstances. It's, we hope we don't have the D, but we definitely have the PTS.
Yes,
That
is true. I do miss the rush from the days of working the street.
And that's part of it. And
Right.
you kind of, your body ends up conditioned so that under the flood of adrenaline where most people would normally,
we excel.
would go to
Well, you
pieces
need
to
that
actually have
though.
the
That's
clarity.
We do.
that's part of the job. I think you
Yeah.
need to have
But
that.
The disorder is when you can't function any other way.
Yes.
Yes.
So that's when you then create conflicts in your life, and so that you sort of have that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I would just say
that's
that.
the idiot's guide to PTSD for everybody.
There you go.
Yeah, I would just say that it's dealing with like Jamie was saying, dealing with demons, I would much prefer over dealing with human beings.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, I agree with that.
Absolutely.
I mean, because they follow. There's protocols.
there are rules. Yeah.
and they don't break those protocols. There's deception, and everything. But once you know what the deceptions
Well, they
are,
can't.
what's that?
They can't break them.
They can't break them.
because
Correct.
they're put in by God. I mean,
Well, that's the thing. See, that's the thing with the angels. Even though they're fallen, they still are subject to the will of God. We can violate it. They
have the free will
cannot.
thing, yep.
So even everything that a demon does is still under the will of God. Human beings can break the will of God repeatedly. That's kind of where the story comes from, where they got jealous of us because they were seen as it was seen, at least in the terms of the story, that God was favoring a lesser species, a lesser creature. Why are you giving this lesser creature this power that you have, the ability to be free will,
and to create life.
and to create life where we can't do that. This is why people are like, the Nephilim are they impregnated women. No, they didn't. Angels can't reproduce. They don't have that ability. That's something that is restricted to the powers of creation. And no, angels do not have that. Animals do, clearly, but it is because it's that we're like an intimate part of the creation itself. We're not the governance of creation. We're part of creation. Angels are creatures too, but at a different level. Okay, so I get frustrated when people say the Nephilim they were the offspring of fallen angels and all. It's no, the daughters of men thing is strictly just how, again, using the metaphor of Scripture in the ancient world, the way they used to write. Okay, that it was seen as the descendants of Abel. I'm sorry, the descendants, not Abel, the descendants of Seth were the righteous, those were the sons of God, and then the sons of Cain, the same Cain from the Cain and Abel story, the sons of Cain were the damned because he committed the sin, right? So they were the daughters of men. So you had the sons of God, the daughters of men, and it was the two tribes, you could say, they're not real tribes, they're metaphorical tribes, coming together and mixing was not considered to be a good thing because you were bringing in the righteous and mixing them with the unrighteous. Had nothing to do with fallen angels, but this is just the crazy stories that people come up with. Well, it's a great story, but like save it for Dungeons and Dragons, not for the Bible. All right, so what's our next one?
So Jimmy, I'm not to interrupt you, Brandon. I wanted to get to Jimmy's because he was the first question. My question for Jimmy: I live next to an Indian reservation, and my granddad always told me, "Don't bury me on this land," meaning America. Our family would be cursed. He really believed this, and now I'm considering cremation.
So what's the question? Is he asking me if he should do this?
I believe so, yeah.
Well, I think that's a personal decision. I think it's something that has to do with you. I will say this.
I think he's wondering if he would be cursed if he were to be buried on.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with what your spiritual beliefs are.
Or just in the burial ground?
Well, maybe the reservation? Is he talking about the reservation? Or
Jimmy, can you clarify? He says, I'm considering it out of respect to the native people. Sorry, long post. I'm secretly at work listening.
I can understand.
Clarify, Jimmy?
I can understand with the reservation it being problematic because of the whole way that has been introduced.
It is kind of cursed land, but here, speaking as, a little Native American blood in me, yes, that land, if you're talking about reservation land, if you're talking about native land, it was someone else's land before it was theirs too. So we inherit land, whether it be through good means or bad. If it's done in a respectful manner and where am I going with this? So
we should be buried in consecrated land anyway. If we're Christians,
Well, that's why I need to know.
I'm making an assumption, so
cremation's not going to make much of a difference. But the land, it's been passed on down the ages, over and over again.
Next to a reservation.
It doesn't just belong to one tribe. It belonged to someone else before that.
It depends a lot on what your spirituality is and, where that is manifesting in your life, I think. Because, as Father Chris said, if you are a Christian, then if you're following and getting yourself set up for the Christian rite of burial, and this is being done where you will be buried on consecrated ground, regardless of where it is. This is holy ground. Okay, it's been made holy. So anything that would be, an unholy presence there is removed by the virtue of what the land is. He's
specifically saying next to the reservation. So that's different.
Well, but the same thing applies. If you're Christian and you're being buried on consecrated ground through the rite of Christian burial, then you have nothing, absolutely nothing at all to worry about. If you're not Christian, then I could see where, the spirits of, for example, the spirits of the native people could create conditions for that spirit that would be unfavorable and could actually elicit a type of curse to that person, because those Christian protections are not offered in such situations. And I can tell you that if there are many spirits that died here on this land that were the victims of the atrocities that were committed by virtue of just what it is, what the history is, regardless of where you are.
Yeah, history's ugly.
It is. I mean, it's like, we can get upset about colonialization, and, we can get upset about the imperial times. But the reality is that was not new. The Jewish people were dealing with this with the Romans. Asia had its own versions of this. It's a constant perpetual, even in what is now America. The tribes themselves were fighting amongst each other and killing each other.
There were slaves among the tribes. The enemies that were captured were made slaves, or killed, or sacrificed.
It's human nature. This is part of the fallen human nature that, if you're opportunistic and you happen to be the more powerful one at the time, then you take advantage of that power and you dominate. This is the history of mankind. It's still kind of this way, only we do it in a more respectable way. Now we use corporations to do it.
Now we use politicians.
We use politicians and corporations, but but even now and then, I mean, what is Putin doing in the Ukraine? It's the same kind of mentality, and this is what's been going on since the beginning of time. This is fallen human nature. Okay, but the Christian life is such that there are tools within it to consecrate the unholiness of these actions. And we can make spaces, sacred spaces, that are safe for these things. But I can't guarantee those protections if you don't have the Christian life, if you don't practice the Christian life. And I'm not saying you should. I'm just saying that if you don't, then the answer that I have to give you is different. And so if you're not, then yes, I think that the spirits that would be very much connected to your ancestry and your ancestral spiritual heritage could create problems for you after death if you were buried in or around or in proximity to a reservation that is not already consecrated as holy ground. I think that could pose definite problems.
I would also like to clarify that, and this isn't a very popular opinion anymore, but I happen to think it's the truth, which is that, and as you know, I normally live in Australia, where these issues are also
the Aboriginals.
Yeah, you have the same version of it out there.
But I mean, my controversial opinion, it's not controversial from a Christian point of view, but it's controversial from a current society point of view, is there's this obsession with who owns or who are the traditional custodians of the land. And, if you can go back far enough, it's who knows who we displaced who. But fundamentally, I believe all land belongs to the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. Land does not belong to human beings at all. It's created by God and it's his property.
Correct.
And so now, if you look at it that way, that's why what we're really saying is, well, if you're a Christian, we happen to believe that Christianity is right, or the closest description of how God interacts with us. And so Christianity, in acknowledging that the Holy Spirit is in fact the ultimate creator and owner of all land, on earth, is that when the Christian priest says, by the power of your Holy Spirit, sanctify this grave or this acre, whatever, whichever we're doing, well, ultimately that is signed and sealed, and therefore burials that then take place in that are all in God's order, and things, spirits or whatever other beings can't affect that truth because it's been sealed. So I think we get ourselves in lots of knots in the secular world worrying about who were the first people on the land, for not just for Christians, for people of faith who believe that it all belongs to God. In fact, I happen to know that that chimes with Native American thinking too, which is why they thought it was absurd. That
the land doesn't belong to us; we
Manhattan.
belong to the land.
Yeah.
That's pretty much universal in most tribes.
I'd even up it further that we don't even belong to ourselves. I mean, our bodies do not belong to us. All of our reality is on loan to us, which is what is the kind of mindset we should take into all of these kinds of questions. And this is ultimately the problem with spiritual attachment, which is ultimately what Jimmy is talking about, whether he knows it or not, is that, if you're talking about cursed, becoming cursed, if you're buried on land or something like this because of the history there, that's spirit attachment that causes those kinds of curses. And spirit attachment is always about holding on to that which you need to let go of. We started the conversation off about this, letting go of worldly cares, and why that's one of the prayers in the Orthodox liturgy. And then also, talking about how we become a bit materialistic. And, we talk about Baphomet and the devil card and the tarot. All of this is a precautionary tale to not become attached. If you look at the basis of the theology of Buddhism, that's really all it is telling you to do.
But this also tells you why there's so much conflict, particularly now, and I know in the States this is it expresses itself in politics. Are you CNN, are you Fox? Is that there's a fundamental divide, which we've described really well, between people that believe in God and people that don't.
Yeah.
Because if you believe in God, then actually, you don't have to. Those concerns are placed upon God's shoulders, who can bear that yoke. That we don't have to be concerned with ultimate, ownership of anything, because we don't even own ourselves.
No, we don't.
It's where that's why our morality is not down to our subjective opinion. It's about, we believe we've been made by God, and He gets to tell us. Because we can't moralize against God. He's an objective reality that tells us. And so, because these are the conversations I have all the time with people, because most people, even if they say they're Catholics, or they had a cradle faith in some tradition or other, they fundamentally do not think like a theist. They think like an atheist.
Or a materialist,
yeah, which is one of the same.
It is really one of the same, completely. Actually, I think the bottom line to answer the question is that it depends on you, Jimmy. Are you capable of rising above your attachments and dying well, or do you feel that you are at spiritual risk for not? If you are at spiritual risk, if you don't feel that you've made the types of accomplishments that are necessary on a spiritual level to be able to leave this entire reality behind when you die, then you might want to take some precautions in that respect and not get yourself into a situation where you could become or fall victim to very angry spirits who are attached and wreaking havoc in their own personal hell of an afterlife that they've created for themselves. But if you have reached the point where you are able to transcend the limitations of this reality, then nothing can touch you. No curse can follow you. And this is, again, not to kind of gloat on the Christian life, but it's why I am Christian, because it's the most transcendent reality that is available. It's the most accessible version of it. Yeah, there's lots of ways to transcend the limitations of the material world, but I don't think there's one that does it better than the Christian life. So, it's really up to you. It's up to you. But this is why I tell people, die well. Whatever you do, die well.
Die with your eyes open.
Because even if you're not on cursed land, die with your eyes open. That's what the Buddhists do. The worst thing for a Buddhist is to die in their sleep, because they can't, you want to die awake. You want to die being able to face death, kind of like Jesus, and it's true. We want to be able to look death in the eye and walk beyond it, to conquer it, not to be afraid of it, not to be victim to it, but to conquer it. To do that is to enter into the perfection that awaits us. we're going to take our next break here. And
I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave in this hour because I've got to try and get 3 hours sleep before I've got to go driving.
Okay,
tomorrow.
Father.
Thank you so much for coming on,
joining
Father.
us.
Apologize.
All right. Well,
Safe
we'll see you on
travels.
the next show, okay?
So good to be with you.
It is.
Safe
Take care,
travels.
everybody. God bless. Bye.
We'll take this break here. We'll be back here in just a moment. Just sit back, relax, grab yourself a drink, and when we return here, we'll be taking more of your questions. Don't go away. Welcome back, everybody, to the third and final part of Vestiges After Dark. On this hour, we'll be taking more of your questions, mostly from the chat room, it seems. But if you want to call into the show, we always appreciate that. The number to call is 718-362-6380. That's 718-362-6380. Be sure to enter PIN number 855-4111 to be placed into the queue. That's 855-4111. We'll take you on the air, and you can also call Skype if you're international and don't want to incur any kind of international calling fees. You can call me Skype to Skype, Eye of the Seer, EYEOFTHESEER. That also gets connected to me, okay? But more in just a moment. Okay, I saw some questions there in the chat, and there's one I wanted to answer. Jamie, which one was that?
From Boss Man. Do we have any plans to be on Ghost Adventures anytime soon? Pretty much is what he was asking.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I don't mind answering that. Essentially, I stopped traveling during the whole masking on planes fiasco that took place over the COVID times. It's just not something I was willing to do. And so, if that was the requirement, then I wouldn't go. And so when I was contacted back in 2020, as to my availability for the coming season, they asked me what my thoughts were and feelings on traveling. And I explained that, I'd be more than willing to work on cases. It's just, I'm not willing to travel for that length of time with a mask on my face, sitting on a plane. They usually fly me coach, so it's typically a pretty uncomfortable experience anyway. Sometimes I can upgrade, but not always, so I just wasn't willing to do it. So I said, when things go back to normal, I'll be more than happy to come back on. So when things did finally normalize, I reached out to them again and said that, we're back to taking cases and traveling for them. So if there's anything that comes your way where you need me, know that I am available for you. And they were happy to hear that. Zach was happy to hear that and was excited about the prospect of being able to work on future seasons. So there has been several cases, and I would say that there's been a little bit of a shift in the sense that they've involved me a little bit more in the case selection process, and I'm a little bit, I'm kind of maybe a little bit meticulous about that aspect of it. So there's been some cases that we have considered, but they have not simply worked out. So there could have been a couple of episodes, but there's just nothing that has worked out yet in terms of, being able to meet the needs of the show as well as, being able to justify my getting involved in it. But I can tell you this, chances are good that you will see Jamie and I back on Ghost Adventures at some point as soon as a good case comes along. So hopefully that answers the question. All right. So what's Brandon, do you have one or have you seen any that we might have missed? Why don't you go?
Well, he's been paying attention. He's got a couple.
So we actually have enough questions that if we gave each one its individual time, we could go into like a fourth or a fifth hour.
Oh, wow.
Right.
That'd be wonderful. I wish I had the time, but I don't.
Yeah, I got to get some sleep at some point.
Well, now that Father Chris is gone, I can probably go a little quicker because, when he chimes in, he's a talker like I am. So it's like having two talkers can be a little bit rough.
Yeah,
but
trust me. When I have two priests on a show with two priests, I just sit back and smile most of the time.
But let's hear it. We'll get through as many as we can.
So the first question I saw was from Mystic. Is it possible to remove a thought form when one has been created?
Very good question.
Yeah.
Talk about egregores as well.
You can absolutely remove them. That's what I do, so.
Most of our cases end up being thought forms.
Absolutely. So it's not an unusual thing to encounter. It's not something that we actually anticipate encountering. It's something that's typical enough that we're prepared to go into every case expecting that it's going to be related to that kind of thing. So at that point, the rules of engagement apply. And the exorcism process is tailored specifically to the type of thing that we're encountering. Typically thought forms can be broken with a lot less, pomp and circumstance of the whole solemn rites of exorcism. You can typically take care of them with a much more simplistic methods. But they also tend to be the ones that are the hardest the most resistant in the beginning. So, there's still the wearing down process and some of the things that we do. I try to remind people a lot. I think they think that, one person asked me many months ago, why was Jesus able to exorcise, a demon with just simply commanding them out and then they instantly would be gone, while the Catholic Church has this solemn ritual that takes hours, and then you sometimes have to perform it numerous times, sometimes for weeks or months or even years. And I guess it's a good question. I mean, I can't really fault the question. It's a good question. But the answer to that is that, first of all, Jesus is Jesus. He's God. And there's not much that can stand in the presence of God and resist. We're not God. We're just facilitators of God's grace, and that we're really that grace is only sometimes as good as we're receptive to it. So, we have to be, as exorcists, we have to be very much capable of being able to facilitate that grace as effectively as possible. But the reason the rites of exorcism are so long is not because it needs to be that long for the to get rid of to get a demon out of a person. It's to wear that demon down to the point that we then have the same upper hand that Jesus has when he would cast them out instantaneously. It's to get them so weak that they will bend to even our broken will through the commands of Jesus. Because remember, the exorcist is just a facilitator. It's Jesus who's the exorcist. But the process by proxy is that's where the church comes in. And it's sometimes only as good as we are. And, we have to be as connected as possible to be able to effectuate that. So it's helpful, because we're not God, it's helpful to be able to use the rites of exorcism to wear a malevolent force down to the point that it obeys us. So a thought form or a created demon is just a matter of wearing it down to the point that it dissolves, so, and that's what you're actually doing. You're dissolving it. You're wearing it away to the point that it's no longer an issue, where it doesn't have enough power to cause the person any more harm. And
she also wanted to ask about egregores, because that's a little bit different.
Yeah,
it's usually the mass. A large amount of people create the egregore.
Yes,
some of these haunted locations, I believe, aren't haunted anymore at all. I think they're haunted by egregores created by investigators that came in hoping they would find something.
They are, and you are 100% correct on that, which is, again, another reason why ghost tourism kind of pisses me off, because it just creates problems,
Amy Allen's really against that as well.
Yeah, for that, I'm sure for that reason. I've had limited interaction with Amy Allen, but from what we did talk
she's good
about,
people.
From what we have talked about, I know she gets this.
Yes, she does.
She does. And I think that's why, out of all of the Travel Channel people out there who are not GAC,
and she's leaving.
She was one that, and she is leaving, but she was one that would follow me on Twitter. Not many of them did, because I think I break paradigms, and a lot of them don't want to hear it. But she got it. Amy Allen is one of the few that actually gets it. So I have a lot of respect for her.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I like, I don't have anything against anybody in the field. I know a lot of them have a lot against me. But there are just people that I respect more. And I'd say Amy is on the top of the list there for this reason, because she gets this, she understands this. But egregores are a different matter, because it depends on the type of egregore you're dealing with. So let me give you an example. Let's say you have a house, you have a family that's being tormented by something, and you find that it's the teenage daughter who is having some kind of spiritual hormonal situation that creates a poltergeist that now manifests in the form of an effect that now the whole family is experiencing and being negatively impacted as the result of it. That's an egregore too, because more than one person is encountering the effects. And that would be no different than trying to remove a fallen angel or an elemental in the sense of difficulty. You still have to wear it down and then go through the process of removal. But if you're talking about an egregore in the sense of like how people understand, well, how we were talking earlier about Christians and how they have turned the devil into this larger than life, almost a competitor to God. I mean, most Christians these days are not really truly monotheists anymore. They're dualists. You know what dualism is, I hope. Dualism is the belief that, like Zoroastrianism, where you have a good deity and an evil deity who are of equal power and in constant competition with each other. That's what Zoroastrianism teaches. And a lot of Christians have turned the Christian faith into that very thing. They see the devil as this competitor to God, equal in power. or at least equal enough to be able to affect us just as easily. And that's just not true. The devil is a creation. It's part of creation. He's not a deity. He doesn't have any power of his own. In fact, the only power he has is that which you give him. So, he's not that powerful. But because people think he's powerful, they have created an egregore out of that power. And so now Satan is absolutely a real thing that's out there tormenting people. And yes, as exorcists, we have to contend with that too. And something that large, something that's affecting that many people, is a lot more difficult to get rid of, because there's always somebody giving it fuel.
Yeah.
When if it's just a family with like the teenage daughter example, when it's just a poltergeist that turns into something a little more, you're just localized to the people in that household. You can talk to them. You can explain metaphysically what's going on there and help them to overcome it, so that they can become an aid to you in the work of removing it. But when you have an entire world that believes in this demonic creature that some see as almost an equal competitor to God, that's really hard to overcome, because even if you're getting rid of it in your little corner of the world, there's somebody out there giving power to it through their fear. And so this is why I do shows like this. This is why I broadcast, even in my own little small way, the masses of the Holy Nicolaitan Catholic Church, and why I get the message out there on TV shows like Ghost Adventures. Any opportunity I get to be able to teach people about the truth of this stuff is so that I can take the power away from that egregore and make it weaker. Because when people realize that it isn't a devil, that it isn't some fallen angel that's so powerful that they can't overcome it, that it's really just a manifestation of their own fear, then guess what happens? I win when I'm the exorcist. And that's why I do what I do. Because by teaching you how to stop feeding it, it makes it easier for me to kill it. But these are real things. They're just not real in the way we think they are. But to answer the question, egregores, you deal with them just like you deal anything else. So a large egregore, more powerful, kind of like dealing with a fallen angel, and, a more localized egregore, you just deal with it like you would any kind of, spirit attachment.
It's kind of like the difference between putting out a fire in a fire pit and putting out a house fire.
You
just need more water.
You just need more water. Little holy water.
Yeah, more holy water.
And also, I guess I'll add to that in a smaller scope, that the people I investigate with, whenever Ouija board comes up, their minds instantly go to the Ouija board demon.
Right.
And a lot of the people I investigate
that Z word,
the
maybe?
Zozo, you mean talking about Zozo?
Yeah. They won't even say his name because they're afraid of it.
It's
and
like Voldemort. It's like
Zozo,
Voldemort. I mean, are we
yeah.
playing Harry Potter, or are we Christians here? I mean, are we going to believe in the message of the gospel? Do we understand the power of the cross, or are we going to run around like the wizard folk on in Harry Potter that says, he who must not be named, it's ridiculous. Zozo has no power. There's no power in that. He's just simply, the power is what you give it, and your fear is what you give it. That's what it feeds on. And that's why these things don't affect me, because I don't have any food for it. I've got nothing to give it. Even my anger, it can feed on anger too. It prefers fear, but anger will take. Even the anger that I have from the frustrations that I deal with are righteous anger. I'm not an angry person for the sake of being angry. I'm not even an angry person. But I do get frustrated with injustice. I get frustrated with stupidity. But those things are not things that I direct in some kind of way that it controls my life. So these things even that is not enough food to power these things in my life. And I just say this not because I'm like patting myself on the back and saying, look at how great I am. I'm telling you this because as a person who deals with these forces on a daily basis, you too can overcome them. You don't really need me. Please put me out of a job. I would love that. put me out of a job. I would much rather you affirm your place as a creature of creation, made in the image of God, operating under the sanctity of the cross and with full knowledge of what that means. I would much rather you go out there and put that out into the world instead of fear into these silly creatures like demons. Just remove them. Get rid of them. You don't need me. All right? You only need me because you guys aren't doing the work. But if you guys did the work, you wouldn't need me. And I could go retire somewhere. And I wouldn't mind that.
We do have another question from Bossman.
Yes.
I think it's a very good question that needs a little bit of time to go into. He asked, is it safe to take Revelations literal?
No, not even a little bit.
Because it's not.
Because it's, first of all, it's not written to be literal. It's a multifaceted metaphor, just like the Garden of Eden story, just like Noah's Ark and the flood. Although the flood probably has some basis in reality, but the whole thing about collecting, two of each animal and stuff is. I mean, these are not. These are not histories here. This is not, this is not a historical document in that sense. It's a metaphor. It's a archetypal story that tells a larger truth, a higher truth, a truth that's even greater than history, but not one that's to be used in that literal sense as how we see history. So it's not like reading about the Declaration of Independence, for example. That's a different kind of writing. And it's dangerous to read Revelation as though you're reading the Constitution of the United States of America. It's not that kind of document, okay? It doesn't hold that kind of authority. It does in places, because it does affirm that Jesus comes back. It does affirm that in the end, the broken, fallen world is eliminated and replaced with the perfection that should have been here all along. That's true. That's actually literal. But, when people start trying to figure out who's the Antichrist, that's where it becomes problematic. When you start thinking that every president of the United States is the Antichrist, that's problematic. It's Obama, it's Trump, everyone. I think every president we've had in my lifetime has been accused of being the Antichrist. That's ridiculous. How silly is that? That makes you, and honestly, it's worse than that. It makes the Christian religion look like we're just a bunch of nuts. And it makes a farce out of the religion. Look at the damage that does to those who are on the fence, or worse, people that don't even need reasons to hate us, and now you've given them another one. That's what this does. And that's why it's very problematic when you take this stuff that is ludicrous to take literally. You do not, when you read Revelation, you should know just by virtue of reading it. If it were any other story not in the Bible, would you believe it? No, of course you wouldn't, because you would know instantaneously that this is not a historical document. So why? Because it's the Bible that now we're going to change the rules? We have to understand that there's a difference between historical truth and archetypal truth. There's a difference between what is actually true and what is archetypally true. And the Bible is largely written in archetypal truth with historical truths thrown in there. Okay? And I think it's pretty easy when you pay attention, if you actually sit down with the scriptures and read it and study it with a good understanding of, background theology, having a really good, course or good professors to teach it. I think it becomes almost a brainless activity, honestly, to tell the difference. And I'm not trying to insult anybody out there that might be struggling with this thing, but I'm trying to explain to you, you only think that Revelation, those of you who have taken Revelation as some kind of literal historical document, you're only doing that because you've been told to do that.
Right. A lot of the Protestant churches teach that.
Yeah, I know.
That's how I was raised.
Yes. And that's
exactly how I was raised.
right. And so you're what you're really believing in is fear of not believing, and fear, being accused of having less faith because you're not doing it the way your church tells you should be doing it. And that's very problematic. Okay. So is there truth in Revelation? Absolutely. All of it is true, but very little of it is historically true. In fact, most of it was written as a document to talk to other Christians in code about the problems that they were facing in that time against the Romans, particularly Emperor Nero, who is a very...
Yeah, we all know Nero.
Yeah, I mean, he was...
Psycho.
He hated Christians more than... I mean, he started fires and blamed Christians so that they had to have excuses to kill them. This is the world in which they were trying to build the church within. And so it reached a point where things were so perilous that the only way to be able to communicate with other Christians in other places would be to write down things in a metaphor that the other Christians could interpret but not realize that they were actually talking about the Romans. So this Antichrist that everyone is waiting for was Emperor Nero. They were talking about him. And if you read scripture correctly, you would realize that anytime outside of that moment, when scripture talks about the Antichrist, it's never the Antichrist. It's always Antichrists. You know why? Because everybody has the potential to be an Antichrist. Anytime you go against the will of God, you are an Antichrist. You yourself have been an Antichrist.
You talked about this in one of your homilies.
I did.
Recently.
And that's the context in which the scripture uses it. So when they were talking about the Antichrist in that story, they were talking about the Emperor Nero, so that the other Christians could feel encouragement that don't worry, Christ will come and rescue us from this. The church will endure. And guess what? It did. So is Revelation prophecy? Yes. Did it come true? Absolutely. We're still here, aren't we? But that's the mind that you have to take into it. When people start trying to attach nonsense like rapture and the end of the world, that is completely contrary to the message that the scriptures are there to give you. That is missing the point. The point is about salvation and making salvation abundantly available to yourself and to others who want it, not forcing it down their throats, just simply making it available. I think I do a pretty good job of that. I will pat myself on the back about that one because I do a very good job of that. I have done a great deal of work in my life to make this gospels available. I have a church that is very small, but it is a safe place to come regardless of your background so that you can learn more about it. And just about every week we gain another person, not necessarily a benefactor or a supporter, but somebody that comes and listens. And that's really the most wonderful thing. That's the most important thing, and that's what the church was always here to do. And Revelation was there to act as an encouragement to the people, to the first century Christians. But it was never meant to be what we've turned it into, this kind of, end of the world Nostradamus prophecy nonsense. This is not what it is and not what it was intended to be. So is that dangerous? Yeah, it's very dangerous because you're leading people when you take Revelation and turn it into that, you're leading people down the wrong path. They're missing the point. The Bible's not about the end of the world. The Bible is about salvation. All right? It's not a foreboding document. It's a document of hope and encouragement. And when you reduce it down to antichrists and nuclear explosions and the world burning in fire, you've completely negated the entire message of Jesus in that moment. That I see as an atrocity. And worse, when objective, intellectual people who are not Christians see Christians act this way about this book, it just gives more fuel to the fire to hate us and think that we're all just a bunch of ignorant, stupid nuts. And I'm tired of being lumped into that because, as I've said, I don't have much tolerance. I am bigoted against stupidity. I am. And I really get angry that there are so many Christians out there who use the term Christian who make me look bad, make me look stupid for being one. because Christianity is anything but a simpleton's religion. It's a very complex intellectual religion, but nobody treats it like that. They prefer to turn it into some kind of fiction, some fantasy land story. Well, if you want that, go to Disney World. Stay out of the church. But, leave the religion alone. But no, it is a problem when people take Revelation literally.
I'm going to say one of the issues I had with the Book of Revelations is growing up, we were taught that 666 is the number of the devil, Satan, Lucifer.
It's translation.
But then when I actually read the verse, it says, for it is a number of a man.
Mm-hmm.
Or it is a human number. I never read that growing up in church until I was not in a church and in the paranormal to read that and understand it.
Yeah. Yeah. And and worse, it's not even 666. So that just makes it even funnier that once again, Crowley with his, exploiting the stupidity of Christians that were just as bad back then, ran with the whole 666 thing. I encourage my students who have the Crowley Thoth deck, go look at the ace of discs and you'll see it's got 666 on it. That whole Mark of the Beast thing, it wasn't even that. That was a scribal error. When you look at the earliest documents we have, the number is actually 616. It's a scribe made an error in 666, and then it got proliferated in future translations to the point that became the standard number, but it's not even the right number. So it's like, somebody asked me, I don't remember what it was, but somebody found an occurrence of 666 and they contacted me and said, are you, do I need to be blessed? Do I need to come see you because I got this number? It's like, no, it's just a number.
But
even
it's been turned into its own tulpa.
And that's what's happened with it. That's what's happened with it. It's turned into a tulpa. We have got, I think, Marina calling in from Canada. Hello, you're on the air.
Marina. Maybe.
What's going on here? She was there, and then she's gone. I think she's gone.
Try it again, Marina, if you can hear us.
Go ahead. I'm going to close this up. Go ahead and try calling back in. There it is. Okay, there we go. Hello, Marina. Speaker. What is going on here? All right. Can you hear me?
She's trying. There she is.
For some reason, I'm not... We're just having trouble here with this tonight.
Well, it's got to be trouble with something.
Yeah, always has to be something.
No worries. Can you hear me now?
Hey!
Yeah, but you're coming through the wrong source. Let me see if I can get you into where everyone.
No worries.
Now we got you. Okay.
There he is.
Thank you for calling in. Yeah. It took a while.
No
Sorry about
worries.
that.
Okay. It's okay. That happens. I had a question today. So thank you for the other day for answering my questions about indulgences.
Oh yes.
Because like you just said, absolutely, the Christianity is absolutely an intellectual religion. Try to get through the catechism. I'm like, I'm too dumb for this. This is it's when you actually really try to hours and hours trying to understand everything. You're like, wow, you realize how much you don't know. I had the one question that like curiosity about indulgences. I was wondering how the church determines how it came to understanding indulgences, and how do we know that it works? Was it like more of an intellectual conclusion, or?
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, it evolved largely out of the Middle Ages, in a time when people were wanting more formal expressions of tangibility with their faith. I would say that when you look at the Middle Ages, one of the defining aspects of it religiously was trying to make God as tangible as possible, because they would read stories in the Old Testament where, God would appear in these magnificent ways, would communicate in these magnificent ways. And, but mundane life is not quite like that. It doesn't, you don't encounter burning bushes, and, you don't experience angels on the road. And, it's not something that is commonplace. And of course, I think the mind of the medieval man and woman was such that they wanted to be able to more directly connect with their faith in that tangible way. So the church would create means to do so by utilizing its ability to direct grace as it sees fit. So this is the origin of it. The church created it because it is its prerogative to do so. The church is the instrument of God's grace on earth, and it was empowered by Jesus to do whatever it needed to do to be able to effectuate that. So at some point, because as we talked about in the first hour, people were very much concerned about scrupulous things, of fear of hell was a major problem. The devil was hiding around every corner and within every corner, trying to get you, trying to steal your soul. And most people lived pretty, just like today, pretty rotten lives morally. Particularly the nobility did. So it was a concern because, you have a guy, okay, let's say he's a prince or something, or somebody that's of importance. And, he's married and has children, but, his wife isn't satisfying. So he wants to have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 mistresses to engage, his sexuality and make it more exciting. Well, that's a problem when you're a Christian, because that's, adultery, it's fornication. These are mortal sins, and the church is teaching mortal sin leads to hell, inevitably. So he can repent, but the problem is he's not going to be able to, realizing that his appetite is such, he's not going to be able to repent to the point that he can give it up and die in such a state that he's in perfect grace so that he can go to heaven. So he needs something else to deal with the fact that he's going to have an extended stay in purgatory. But he doesn't like that, because he's a prince and he's had everything handed to him all his life, and he wants a way out of this. So he appeals to the bishops. Can the church do something about this? Because I don't want to be in purgatory for this extended period of time. So the church creates a means to effectuate grace that allows an individual to be able to lessen the severity of purgatory, so that the purification process isn't as uncomfortable and as painful as it otherwise would be. And that's where the indulgence was given birth to. And so initially it started out with a very innocent thing, do 30 minutes of scripture reading, and then say a simple prayer like, come Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and enkindle in them the fire of your love. Something like that would lead to an indulgence. And then there were mystics that would have visions where Jesus would give indulgences directly in their visions. And then the church adopted those as part. The Divine Mercy is one of these examples. There's multiple ways to get indulgences. None of them are terribly difficult. But again, because of the Middle Ages being what they were, you had popes that were, had 4 or 5 mistresses. So, what were the chances that the secular nobility was doing any better? They weren't. And so, then you got the issue with money. So then they were like, well, can I just give you a good donation and get an indulgence right away? Do I have to do all these prayers too? And, there were some unscrupulous bishops that said, sure, 500 gold pieces or whatever, and they got their, they got their brand new palace, and the prince got his indulgence, and everyone was happy until Martin Luther put the stops to it. But indulgences were not that nefarious initially. They got a nefarious reputation because of what the abuses that were taking place with them. But overall, it really is just about being able to utilize grace in a way that makes us more perfect. And the more perfect we become, the less of a effect purgatory will have on us while we're finishing the process. So does it work? Well, philosophically, one can infer that it works and here's how you do it. Okay, so this is how you can prove to yourself, at least if you're a philosophically minded person, you can prove to yourself the existence of purgatory and indulgences. So we know that a person who's perfect, at least a person of faith, we have to make sure we have that caveat, because an atheist isn't going to have any use for anything I'm about to say. But if you're a person of faith, okay, if you're just a Christian, but you're on the fence about things like purgatory and indulgences, you know that if you die in a state of where you have had your sins forgiven, then you go to heaven. If you refuse that forgiveness, then you go to hell. But what happens if you're saved, but you're still in sin? You're too good to go to hell, but you're not good enough to go to heaven, because nothing imperfect can enter the kingdom of heaven, because if you were to do that, then you'd fall all over again. That's exactly how the fall of man happened. God created a perfect reality, and we sinned and brought imperfection into that reality, and it made the entire universe now imperfect, to the point that now even animals and plants die, not just people. Everything now dies. Stars die, all because of the fall. We created entropy through that fall, and now we can't escape it unless we go through the grace of the cross. So that's good Christian theology right there. Nothing unusual about that. So what happens if you have enough grace that you're not going to end up in hell, but you're not perfect enough yet to enter into heaven? So there needs to be some kind of purification to get you to heaven. Something has to take place that makes it possible for you to enter into that reality, so that you don't cause another fall all over again, to proliferate the brokenness of our reality as we understand it. So the way that this is dealt with is purgatory. Now, that's not a location. It's not a place you go. It's a condition that must take place in order to make it possible for you to now be perfected. So only the saved would enter into purgatory, because only the saved would need it. Those that are damned don't need it. They're not going to be perfected no matter what happens. And those that are in heaven don't need it, because they're already perfect. So there has to be something that deals with those that are in between, which is going to be the majority of us. Very few of us are going to be able to enter into heaven perfectly. We're not going, we're going to die with some sin, unless we're very lucky and somebody brings the priest at the last minute and you get last rites and you die right then and there. Chances are you're going to die with some sin on your conscience that you're going to have to contend with at some point. And that is what purgatory is for all intents and purposes. Again, not a place, not a location. It's a condition of purification, which is taught by the church to be a somewhat uncomfortable thing, because it's about removing attachment, and people don't like attachments. And this is actually very Buddhist too. So Buddhism has a very similar thing to this in the Bardo. So it's not just like a Christian matter. It's something that's more universal than that. A lot of religions have a similar thing to this. So that handles purgatory, but what about indulgences? Well, here's how you can prove yourself about the existence of indulgence. Okay, we know that grace expedites our ability to become perfected. We know that the more we receive the Eucharist, the more we go to confession, the more perfect we get each time. So if the church, which is the instrument of grace and has the authority by Christ to produce those actions that increase grace, and the church declares that this is going to be an indulgence to increase grace, then we know that grace expedites our process of perfection, which means that the more perfect we are, the less of an effect purgatory requires. And so therefore we know that it works because we know grace works. And that's really all any Christian needs to know about it. It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. And again, you negate grace when you pay for it. So Martin Luther was right about that. But it's about this process of perfecting. So what an indulgence essentially is, it's saying, I'm going to do this spiritual action now while I'm alive so that I can start the process of perfecting while I have this opportunity, so that I don't have to wait till I die in order to do it. So what you're doing is you're starting to pay some of the, I hate to say penalty, but you're starting to pay some of the process. You're starting to take on the process of purgatory now, so that there's less for purgatory to do when you finally do get there. That's what an indulgence is.
Okay. And what's the difference between a plenary and partial?
Okay, a plenary is when you do a particular type of indulgence that literally completely negates all of the effect of purgatory. So that is like basically, if you were to go to confession and receive the grace of confession, but let's say you're still imperfect, you still have sinful thoughts or feelings or whatever, which most of us do. And even with confession, even with doing the best job we can, we're still going to have to succumb to human nature. So let's say, you still have these imperfections. Well, by gaining a plenary indulgence, you literally remove all of the remaining imperfection. And then if you were to die in that moment after receiving a plenary indulgence, then you would die and completely no longer require purgatory, and you could enter into the kingdom of heaven because you will have been perfected through that grace. A partial indulgence is when it only has half that effect, or just a part of that effect. There's still more that would be necessary. You're not going to be able to eliminate purgatory completely, but you have enough grace to get started in a way that you've significantly reduced the need for purgatory. So
okay. That makes more sense.
Okay. I know it's complicated. I think it's actually a whole lot more complicated than it needs to be. I don't think the church really talks that much about indulgences anymore. It's about, do the prayers, have a relationship with God. That's going to take care of everything, it really does. So
yeah, well, like I said, like campus chaplain gave us a handout, but it was mostly just simple examples. But I was wondering kind of what are they? So I was like, oh God, what am I looking at? So
right.
that makes sense. And then it just opened a whole can of worms because everything I looked at was so dense. So I'm like, oh, this is not beginner friendly. But yeah, this makes more sense. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. I think it's really just about giving people an opportunity to make something more tangible that's a mystery. So it's really just about trying to put something into their hands that they can grasp, so that they can try to wrap their heads around some of these complex concepts, like what really happens to me after death. How is sin rectified? What is judgment day? How is my soul judged? These are just ways of trying to be able to more deeply participate in trying to do good. So I see a person that's seeking out an indulgence as not someone that's trying to cheat the system. I'm seeing a person that seeks out indulgences as really trying, what prayers can I do to better effectuate the perfecting of my soul, so that, I'm prepared better to die, and I can die well. So I'd say indulgences help you die better, than those that don't care about them. But I don't think they're necessary. Absolutely, I think there's other ways to be able to, increase one's relationship with God that has the same effect. So if they help you, then use them. If they don't, well, you don't need them. Just make sure that you're doing the parts that you do need to do. So like the sacraments and a vigilant prayer life. I mean, does wonders. So indulgences become just secondary at that point.
Perfect. Well, I'll get there. I'm getting there.
We're all trying to get there.
We're on the same ride.
Thank you so much for calling in, Marina. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you. Always a pleasure. Take care.
Take care, Marina.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good one. And we probably have time for maybe, Brandon, maybe one short one.
Okay, one short one.
Well, I mean, short-ish.
There's no such thing as short questions on this show.
Short-ish, let's say that.
Shortish.
I didn't see any of that.
Well, let's do what we can, and even if it's a long one, we'll try to get through it.
But I didn't see any other questions in the chat.
Okay.
I did not either. I'm scrolling back through now.
Okay. Well, I mean, we've got let's see here. We've got maybe about 4 minutes, 3 or 4 minutes where we could talk about something. So, Brandon, you are sort of the mastermind of questions. Of course, you do also tend to open cans of worms with those questions. So I can't guarantee we can get a complete answer in 3 minutes, but we can try.
Well, I do have a thought which could lead into some questions that I was going to bring up earlier.
Okay.
Kind of on the same line of people not understanding like the book of Revelations or just the Bible in general.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember at my old job having a conversation with someone who did not drink the Monster energy drink.
Because of the M?
Yes, because the clause in Hebrew meant 666.
Yeah, there's a whole.
Yeah.
There's a whole. I mean, Chrome's been accused of it too, and
well,
all kinds of symbology.
Well, see, that's what
that fear thing.
That's what we were talking about with scrupulosity and superstition. See, that's scrupulosity, that's superstition. You know, it's just like people would probably freak out that, you know, here I am, a bishop, you know, with a picture of Baphomet on the wall. You know, it's again, these things, you give them too much power. People give too much power to their superstitions. I don't have any superstitions. I don't knock on wood. I used to torment my grandparents. You know, my grandmother was immigrated from Canada and previously from Poland. So she was an immigrant from Poland to Canada and then came down to the United States from Canada when she was young. And she, you know, Polish people from back then did have a lot of superstitions, and she was one of the worst, more than you could possibly imagine. So you know what I used to do to torment her is they used to have a lot, an unusually large number of umbrellas. And so I would go, and when they would leave the house, I'd stay behind, and they'd go up to the they'd go up to the store or whatever, and I'd stay behind. And I would take every one of those 20 or 30 umbrellas and I'd open them all up in the house and wait for them to get home and watch her reaction, because she'd be scurrying around the house trying to close them real quick because so afraid that I've unlocked the demons or whatever. But, you know, I found it humorous. But, you know, the reality is it's I don't live in fear. I have the cross, and we all do. If you want it, it's there. Take it, you know. And once you take it, you don't need to look back. There's nothing to be worried. What's the worst that can happen to you? You die. Well, you're gonna die anyway. I'd rather die with the cross.
That's something we're all gonna have to deal with.
Exactly. So it's like I don't have any fears or concerns. You know, superstition means nothing to me. So, yeah, drink your Monster energy drinks. You know, have Baphomet on your wall.
Your kidneys may not like it.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, I just don't care. It's like I really piss Satanists off. They try to get under my skin. It's like, hey, want to go have a drink?
Whatever.
So we are going to be on hiatus for the next 2 weeks. Okay, so we will be back in 2 weeks from tonight with a brand new episode of Vestiges After Dark. So make sure that you are subscribed to our channel. Make sure you like our videos because that helps the channel out. And when we come back in 2 weeks, we will see you then. But for now, I'll see you out there.
Thanks, everybody.
God bless everyone.